One night, you belonged to him. This is a true story I've never shared with anyone. I've spent a year trying to make sense of it, wondering if I could have done anything differently. But the truth is, once you look into eyes like his, the outcome is already determined. I write this down now because I know that soon, perhaps within weeks, I won't be myself anymore. I'm not even sure if I'm still fully myself as I type these words. In just 10 seconds of eye contact with him, I lost control of my mind without even realizing it. 1 year. That's how long I'd been single after ending my relationship with Mateo. 1 year of deliberately avoiding romantic entanglements, focusing on my career, and promising myself I wouldn't let another man dictate my emotions. Yet there I was, sitting across from a man I barely knew in a restaurant I couldn't even remember hearing about. My name is Elena 31, a data analyst who moved to Mexico City 3 years ago for a position with an international tech firm. The job brought me here, but the chaotic energy of the city kept me. I've always loved the anonymity of crowds, the feeling that no one really knows who you are. But that feeling began to fade the moment I sat across from Gabriel that night. The restaurant was tucked away near the Angel of Independence, the kind you wouldn't find unless someone told you about it. Not the Instagram-famous establishments with lines around the block or the Michelin-starred destinations and tourist guides. This was the sort of place that hid behind a discreet facade with an entrance from a side street known only to insiders. Pristine white tablecloths, amber light suspended in glass fixtures, and the soft notes of a piano drifting from a distant corner. The air carried the rich aroma of brown butter, red wine, and perfectly seared meat, comforting scents that somehow felt uncanny in their perfection, like a dream where everything is just a little too ideal. I couldn't precisely recall how long Gabriel and I had been talking before this date, or even how we'd exchanged numbers. Our conversations had flowed naturally light and undemanding. I suppose we were both curious enough to meet in person. My first impression of him was undeniable. Gabriel was handsome, not in the flashy, model-perfect way, but with an elegant, refined attractiveness. He stood a head taller than me with jet black hair swept back and a charcoal gray suit that fit him impeccably. But what truly drew me in were his eyes, a deep, steady gaze that exuded confidence, without arrogance, calmness paired with unmistakable intensity. "You're punctual," Gabriel smiled as he pulled out my chair. His voice was warm and deep, with an accent I couldn't quite place, not native Mexican, but something else I couldn't identify. Gabriel spoke about wine and dishes with the knowledge of a connoisseur, suggesting combinations I'd never considered. He seemed to know the menu by heart, though he didn't mention how many times he'd been here. The conversation flowed seamlessly. He truly listened, asking questions just insightful enough to show he was paying attention to every detail I shared. Everything was unfolding perfectly, if not for the strange gestures I began to notice. At first, they were almost imperceptible. He would stare at a waiter, his gaze fixed and focused, as if willing them to come over by thought alone. And the strange thing was, they would come, every single time. "These scallops are incredible," I said, trying to maintain normal conversation. Gabriel nodded gently, setting down his glass. "The next course is even better." He glanced toward the kitchen, and instantly a waiter appeared with our next dish, one I hadn't even known I wanted. I tried to convince myself it was coincidence. Perhaps he'd pre-ordered the entire meal. But there was something undeniably off about how Gabriel interacted with the staff. It wasn't that he was rude, on the contrary. He was always polite and even friendly. But there was a strange tension in his tone, a subtle authority that made me feel he wasn't asking but commanding. "They serve you very quickly," I remarked, probing for a reaction. Gabriel smiled, his lips just touching the rim of his glass. "I wish we were all treated this way, but the world doesn't seem to work that way, does it?" I looked around the room. Other couples were waiting for their meals, signaling to waiters. But for us, the staff always appeared the moment Gabriel seemed to need them. "Tell me more about your work," he said smoothly, changing the subject. "You mentioned data patterns." What exactly does that mean for someone like you? As I explained predictive analytics and consumer behavior models, I watched his eyes. They never wandered, never glazed over with boredom. They remained locked on mine as if he could see beyond my words, reading thoughts I hadn't even formed yet. "You find meaning in the chaos," he said when I finished. "That's rare. Most people are overwhelmed by too much information." "And what do you do, Gabriel?" I asked, realizing he'd expertly deflected every question about himself. "I'm in acquisitions," he replied, the answer simultaneously vague and perfect. "I identify unique assets and integrate them into my portfolio." "What kind of assets?" His smile deepened. "The irreplaceable kind." The restaurant's atmosphere was perfect, warm and intimate, with scents of brown butter, red wine, and roasted meat. Everything was balanced so perfectly it made me uncomfortable, like it was too good to be true. Then a sound tore through the atmosphere. Bang! The restaurant's main door slammed against the wall. A knife fell to the floor, ringing with a high-pitched metallic sound. The piano player in the corner abruptly stopped. The noise from the street flooded in car horn shouts, and with it 4 shadows. 4 armed men wearing ski masks rushed in quickly, forming a horizontal line. One stood guarding the entrance, another pointed a gun toward the tables, and the other 2 advanced to the center of the room. The click as a gun was loaded, followed by absolute silence. The diners dropped to the floor almost simultaneously, chairs falling, glasses breaking, wine soaking into white tablecloths like bloodstains. Staff ran into the kitchen doors slamming shut. And from inside came the sounds of things crashing and muffled sobbing. The entire restaurant reeked of fear perfume mixed with cold sweat, the tense silence hanging like a suspended breath. And then Gabriel stood up. "Gabriel, no?" I whispered in panic, but he was already standing tall, eerily calm, while everyone else was pressed against the floor. He slowly raised his hands with an unimaginable composure, as if he knew exactly what to do. One of the robbers aimed his gun directly at Gabriel's chest. I screamed a short cry born of pure instinct. But Gabriel didn't flinch. He just stared at them with that same fixed, controlling gaze, no fear, no pleading, just a terrible, focused power. Then the impossible happened. The robbers froze, all 4 of them. For a moment time seemed to stop. Then they lowered their weapons and turned toward the exit, as if they'd suddenly remembered they had something more urgent to do. The last one gently closed the door behind them without a sound. No one understood what had just happened. People looked at each other, still waiting for disaster, for gunshots, for chaos that never came. The staff slowly emerged from the kitchen, some trembling, others pretending normality as if nothing had happened. And no one said anything. No one thanked Gabriel because no one had noticed, no one except me. Gabriel had given the robbers the same look he'd been giving the waiters, the look that made people obey without understanding why. I was disoriented like the other diners, but with a completely different sensation. They were shaking, taking deep breaths, trying to return to their meals or convince themselves nothing had happened. I, however, couldn't take my eyes off Gabriel. I kept thinking about how the robbers had looked at him and obeyed. No threats, no money, no negotiation, just that look. Gabriel asked for the check, and when the server brought it, it had been paid. He said nothing, just closed the folder calmly, and thanked the waiter with that same familiar smile, the smile that seemed to leave people without will. "Would you like to go for a walk?" he asked, as if the entire robbery had been just a brief commercial break between courses of our date. I should have declined. I should have made an excuse, called an Uber, and returned to my safe apartment. But instead I heard myself answer, "Yes, I'd like that." We stepped out onto the street. The air was humid with the smell of freshly washed asphalt that sometimes lingers in Reforma Avenue at night. The valet already had Gabriel's car waiting at the door, engine running, as if he knew exactly when we would leave. He didn't tip, and the man didn't ask for one, just held the door open with a blank expression. As I sat in the passenger seat, a fear ran down my spine. What if I wasn't here by my own decision? What if each step I took, each word I spoke, was part of a will that wasn't mine? That thought terrified me, but it also brought a strange, absurd calm. as if accepting it was easier than fighting it. "The date isn't over, is it?" His eyes caught mine in the rearview mirror. "I know a place where we can continue our conversation without any more interruptions." And somehow I agreed. We drove to an upscale shopping center in Polanco. It was still early. The night was just beginning to fill with neon lights and sounds from Mexico City's nightlife. Gabriel said he would treat me to coffee or ice cream if I wanted something sweeter to continue our conversation where it had left off as if nothing had happened. For a moment I felt relieved. I thought that if he wanted to force me to do something, we wouldn't be in public surrounded by people in a bright cafe with background music and the sound of cups clinking. There, amid the noise and light, it was easy to believe everything was normal, but it wasn't. After a few minutes, the waiter approached with 2 steaming cups of coffee. We hadn't ordered them, but they were exactly what we had mentioned a few minutes before without raising a hand or even looking at anyone. The server set them on the table, said, "Enjoy," and walked away without waiting for a response. Gabriel smiled, picked up his cup, and began talking about something else: movies, travel, ordinary things. His voice was gentle, engaging. There was a moment when the light touched his cheek in a way that made it difficult for me to look away. He seemed perfect to the point of being unreal, like a character from a film projected into the real world. I tried to tell myself I was imagining things, that these coincidences, servers appearing at the right moment, robbers walking away, bills being paid, all had rational explanations. I was attracted to his charisma, but part of me remained vigilant, wondering if I was being manipulated. "You're very observant," Gabriel noted, his eyes studying mine. "Most people don't notice the patterns around them." "What patterns?" "The way things flow, the way people respond to subtle cues." He took a sip of his coffee. "The way the world bends when you expect it to." When it came time to pay, the same thing happened as at the restaurant. The bill had been paid. Not a word, not a look, just the receipt with a blue ink stamp reading, "Courtesy of the house." I stared at him. "How do you do that?" He didn't answer, pretended not to understand, took a sip of his coffee and changed the subject. He talked about the city's weather, about how difficult it was to find quiet places amid so much noise, but for some reason every word of his sounded like a command disguised as conversation. "Let's explore a bit more," he suggested, and I found myself following him into a clothing and accessories store just as they were about to close. The employees were already cleaning up, putting away boxes, but as soon as we entered, they stepped aside as if they'd been expecting us. No one said anything, just let us pass and walk among the displays as if the place belonged to us. I felt that he was trying to impress me, but he did it without words, rather with gestures, with his presence that seemed to bend the will of others. When we had looked at everything, he asked me what I liked in the store. I said nothing, it wasn't necessary. I wanted to add that I didn't even know him well, that I couldn't accept a gift from him, but an inner voice, firm and unfamiliar, told me to be careful, better not to say anything. So I remained silent. A female employee then approached, walking slowly with an empty gaze. She carried a gold paper bag. "For the lady," she said with a smile so forced it seemed held by hands from behind her face. "A gift for you." The smile didn't move, just that expression that made me afraid to look her in the eye. I took the bag, opened it, and inside was exactly what I had thought of seconds before, what I hadn't even said aloud. A perfume bottle, the same one I had used years ago and had silently remembered when we passed the fragrance counter. I froze. A chill ran down my back. He was getting into my thoughts. Besides controlling people, he could read what was in my head. "You're not an ordinary man, are you?" I asked, my voice trembling. Fear came over me, a type I had never felt before. A deep, primal fear, not about what might happen to me, but about the reality that everything I knew about the world could be wrong. Gabriel looked at me directly in the eyes with his calmness, as if looking from inside, not from outside. "I'm trying to behave as normally as possible," he said, almost whispering. "You see, everything has flowed naturally." He paused and said, "Or do you feel something's wrong?" That meant he had noticed my fear or had read it. "I can't help it," he added, "but with you I'm holding back. I want this connection to be real." A discomfort rose within me. I didn't know whether I should run away or stay. I couldn't be sure which decision was mine and which was influenced by him. "I like looking through the window of other people's minds," he whispered. "But observing isn't all I can do. I can change what I see." I suddenly felt dizzy, as if the floor was tilting. I grabbed onto the nearest shelf to maintain balance. "How did we meet?" I asked, my voice different than normal, almost someone else's. Gabriel smiled a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Don't you remember we met at an art exhibition? You were admiring a Remedios Varro painting?" I tried to remember. I do love Varro's work, the surreal paintings, the strange creatures, nightmares rendered with exquisite beauty. I had gone to see her exhibition. "Last week, last month, you were wearing a black dress." He continued word by word, as if transmitting the memory into my mind. "I asked what you thought about the painting. You said it reminded you of dreams you had as a child." And then I remembered, or I thought I remembered, a man in the museum, light on a painting, a conversation about dreams and reality. But the memory was fragile, like smoke, vanishing as soon as I tried to grasp it. "I gave you my number," he said, but I knew it was a lie. I couldn't remember what I'd done with that number, or when I'd texted him, or our first conversation. It was all blurry, like looking through frosted glass. I felt a sudden pain in my temple, and when I closed my eyes I saw flashing images, scenes from a life I wasn't sure I had lived. I opened my eyes, and Gabriel was still watching me, still calm, still in control. "What are you doing to me?" I whispered. "Nothing you don't want?" He answered, his voice gentle, but with a hardness underneath. "I saw you a few weeks ago when you were having lunch alone. I saw something in you, a loneliness, a desire to connect. So I inserted myself into your life. A small memory at a time, a text, a call. Bit by bit, until you believed we knew each other. I wanted to run, but my feet wouldn't move. I wanted to scream, but no sound came out. 'Come to my house,' he said. And I knew it wasn't an invitation. I don't remember agreeing to go to his house. I only remember that I was driving his car. I knew exactly which roads to take, which streets to turn onto, how to get there. I recognized the path, though I had never been there before. The garage gate opened when I pressed a button on the dashboard. I didn't even know how I knew it was the control button. When I parked the car, I was already holding his house keys in my hand. I didn't remember taking them, but there they were. It was me who opened the door. Gabriel followed behind me, smiling calmly. We went up the stairs without speaking. Everything was automatic, fluid, as if my body was moving from memory. I knew exactly where to turn on the light switches, where to place my coat, even where the keys belonged. That's when I realized this wasn't my first time here. Despite the rational part of my brain screaming to run, I felt a strange familiarity when entering Gabriel's home. The sensation was like returning to a place that was once your home after many years, familiar yet foreign, like a dream you're not sure you've had. How could I be familiar with a place I'd never been? "My home is your home," Gabriel said as he opened a pre-chilled bottle of wine, as if he knew we would be returning. He poured 2 glasses, handed one to me. I looked around the modern, dark-toned living room. The artwork on the walls, all original pieces I could tell from the texture of the paint, was the expensive kind of abstract. No personal photos, no mementos. The house was perfectly designed but lacked any sense of humanity. It resembled a showroom more than a home. "I like collecting beautiful things," he said, studying me with an appraising look. "Have you done this with many people?" I asked, my voice so small it was barely audible. Gabriel didn't answer directly. Instead, he led me across the room, placing a hand on a door I hadn't noticed before. "You want to know about my abilities. You want to know how I can do what I do. You want to know why I chose you." I didn't remember requesting any of that, but suddenly, those questions burned in my mind. "If you truly want to know," he opened the door, "you'll have to go deeper into my world." The door swung open, revealing a staircase leading downward. No lights, just a faint glow emanating from below an amber pallor. I knew I should leave. I knew I should run. I knew every survival instinct was telling me that going down those stairs was a mistake. But my feet had already begun to move, not by my will. Not exactly. The staircase led to a room I wouldn't have believed could exist in a modern home in Mexico City. It was like a cave, a space carved into solid rock with rough, uneven walls, and a smell of ancient mustiness mixed with freshly burned incense. The room was illuminated by dozens of candles placed in natural recesses along the walls. In the center was a stone altar, a large, flat stone placed on a pedestal. On its surface were objects I couldn't comprehend. Bones, feathers, sealed containers, and an ancient book laid open its yellowed pages, nearly transparent with age. "Where does your power come from?" I asked part of me, still hoping for a rational explanation. "From people," he answered simply. "From their willingness to believe what they want to believe. The human mind fears emptiness. It will fill in the gaps with whatever is available, even implanted memories, suggested desires, or stories told so many times they become truth." He stepped to the altar, turning a page of the ancient book. "My family has practiced this art for centuries. It has many names throughout history. In this country, the ancient Maya called it Kik, the blood of the soul. The Aztecs called it Ixiptla, the replacement or image." "You're not Mexican," I said, not knowing why that mattered now. "Who I am isn't important," he continued, ignoring my observation. "What matters is what I can do, what I can become. I can be anyone in the minds of others. I can change what they see, what they believe, what they remember." "But why?" I asked, trying to understand. "Why not?" he replied, and for the first time I saw a spark of genuine amusement in his eyes. "People go through life with so little awareness of how their minds work. They believe their memories are real, that their decisions are their own, that their thoughts are private. None of that is true." He moved closer to me, one hand gently lifting my chin. At first, I just wanted to look. Then I wanted to taste. Now I want to share. I tried to step back, but my body didn't respond. I stood there frozen while my mind was screaming. "You're not the first," Gabriel whispered, his lips near my ear. "You won't be the last, but you are special. There's a flexibility in your mind, a capacity for impression. I could sense it from the beginning." He led me to another part of the room where there was a small shelf with objects neatly arranged in rows. Each object seemed to be a personal item, a ring, a scarf, a notebook, a pendant. "Mementos," he explained. "A small piece from each person who has entered my world. A link." I understood immediately. These weren't just objects. These were pieces of the people who had come before me. People Gabriel had manipulated, controlled, and what else I dared not think further. "What will you leave behind?" he asked. His hand moved to my neck where I wore a small pendant, a gift from my grandmother before she passed away. I had worn it since I was 16. It was the most personal thing I owned. "No," I choked out. Surprisingly, he stopped. "A heart that knows how to hold," he said, his smile this time not triumphant but almost admiring. "You're fighting me. Few do that." I felt a part of my mind returning. Not all of it, but enough to see more clearly, enough for me to fight. "Why me?" I asked again, this being the first question truly my own since we'd entered the house. Gabriel looked at me seriously. "Because you drank from the source." "What source?" "El Fuente de la Memoria," he said. "The source of memory. One of the most sacred sites still remaining in this city, buried under layers of concrete and history. The ancient spring flows beneath the small park where you often have lunch. No one knows it's there except people like me." "Lunch? I don't understand." "I've been watching you for weeks," Gabriel explained. "Every Thursday you bring a water bottle to Alameda Park. You sit near the old fountain. Once you refilled your bottle from the tap there, from the source." I remembered. I had actually done that. I'd forgotten to bring water once and had filled my bottle from a public fountain in the park. The water had tasted strange, but I hadn't thought anything of it. The water awakened your mind, Gabriel continued. It created a resonance, like a door slightly ajar. I only needed to push gently. That's how you do this? Manipulate people's minds, a magical water source? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Not exactly, he shook his head. The source is just a catalyst. It doesn't create power. It only reinforces what's already there. My family has had this ability for a long time, for many generations before Europeans came to this land. I am the last of my lineage. I need someone who has drunk from the source to pass this power on to. I felt the change in the air, a sudden heaviness, like the pressure before a storm. My stomach tightened with fear. You don't just want to control me, I realized. You want to transfer your power to me. Gabriel smiled, a genuine smile this time. Eventually I will have no choice. The power must be passed on or it dies with me. And I don't want it to disappear. I want to share. Some pieces fell into place. The way he controlled people with a look, the way he read my thoughts, the way he implanted memories. I never had all part of this ability, the ability to control minds, to see thoughts, to change memories. A terrible, immoral power, and he wanted to pass it to me. I wanted to refuse to tell him I would never accept such a gift. But then I realized if he could control my mind, my acceptance didn't matter. He could make me want it. But instead of assaulting my mind, Gabriel took my hand and led me to another door, a small one made of heavy wood on the opposite side of the room. The door opened to reveal another room, smaller and lit only by a single candle. In the dim light, I could see the walls were covered from floor to ceiling with photographs. Hundreds of photos pinned directly to the wall, no frames, many overlapping like a chaotic tapestry. I stepped closer and my heart froze. They were all pictures of me. Me having lunch in the park, me walking to the office, me shopping at the market, me sitting by the window of my apartment reading a book, me sleeping, photos taken through the window of my bedroom. There were pictures from months ago based on my clothing, the season, and the light. There were pictures as recent as a few days ago. You've been stalking me, I whispered. I've been studying you, Gabriel corrected, as if that were less concerning. I needed to know who you were before choosing you. I felt nauseated, a profound sense of violation. Not because of the lies I had already known he was lying about how we met, but because of the extent of the invasion. He had penetrated every part of my life before I even knew he existed. How did you get into my apartment? I asked, trying to understand the scope of the violation. I didn't need to. Gabriel admitted, a disturbing relief in his voice. I just needed to convince your building manager that I was a relative visiting. One look, one suggested thought, and I had keys. I tried to swallow down the fear rising in my throat. How many times have you been in my apartment while I was sleeping? Gabriel didn't answer directly, and that was the only answer I needed. When I thought about it, there had been mornings when I woke up feeling strange objects out of place, an unfamiliar scent in the air, the feeling that someone had just left. I had dismissed it all, believing it was just my imagination, but now I knew. He had been there. He had watched me sleep. I looked deeper into the photo-filled room and noticed something else, a small table with an open notebook and a carefully tied bundle of hair. My hair. I touched my head instinctively and realized my hair was slightly shorter than it had been a few months ago. I had attributed it to split ends, but now I understood. He had taken it. He had cut my hair while I slept. The whole thing was so horrific it went beyond fear, touching a remote region of pure disgust. In that moment, every illusion about Gabriel, the charming man I had met tonight, dissolved. What I saw now wasn't a man, but a predator. I don't understand why you're reacting this way, Gabriel said, genuinely confused. I was careful. I was gentle. I even took care when collecting your hair. You're sick, I whispered, finding strength somewhere to resist. You're a sick man. A flash of anger crossed his eyes, something dangerous and cold. You don't understand the gift I'm trying to give you, he said, his voice now hard. The power to look into others' minds, to know their truths, to shape their reality. That's not a gift, I said. It's a curse. Look what it's turned you into. A stalker, a liar, a thief of others' wills. Gabriel's eyes darkened, and I felt a pressure in my head, a heavy presence trying to force its way into my mind. I knew he was trying to control me, but this time I was prepared. I focused on my fear, using it as a shield. "Stop!" I shouted, and surprisingly he did. Gabriel looked at me with new curiosity. "You're stronger than I thought," he said, a new respect in his voice. "The source has affected you more than I realized. You truly are the one I've been looking for." I backed away, bumping into the small table, knocking over the notebook. It fell open to another page, a page with a detailed drawing, a diagram of some ritual. I glimpsed it, saw symbols I didn't understand, drawings of two human forms linked by lines that seemed to be drawn in blood. "I don't intend to control you," Gabriel whispered, his eyes burning with a new emotion. "I intend to become you." Horror flooded through me as I understood. This wasn't about transferring power. This was about possession. He didn't want me to have his ability. He wanted my body, perhaps because his own was dying, or perhaps this was just a twisted form of immortality, a way to exist forever by jumping from one body to the next. "No," I whispered. "I won't let you do that." "You have no choice," Gabriel said, stepping toward me. "You haven't had a choice since you drank from the source. This is your destiny, Elena. Our destiny." I looked around, desperate for an escape, a weapon, anything. My eyes fell on my pendant, my grandmother's gift. She had told me it would protect me, that it contained the power of my ancestors. As a child, I had believed it. As I grew up, I had dismissed it as superstition. But now, in a world where men could control minds and manipulate memories, perhaps my grandmother's stories weren't just stories. I clutched the pendant in my hand, feeling the metal warm. "You've done this before," I said, trying to buy time. "Disappear and come back in a new body." Gabriel nodded slowly, a cold smile on his lips. "Many times, from one vessel to the next across centuries. I have been men, women, old, young. I have lived 100,000 lives. And the person before," I whispered, "the person who was in this body before you took it over." For the first time, I saw something like real emotion in Gabriel's eyes, a flicker, a faint sign of regret. "He went too far," Gabriel admitted. "A price to be paid, but a necessary price." I understood. He had erased the previous person, taking not just their body, but their identity. A perfect murder. No body, no evidence, just a person disappearing and being replaced by something wearing their skin. And now he intended to do the same to me. "Tonight," Gabriel whispered, "you will go to sleep as Elena and wake up as something else. A greater entity, a more meaningful existence." He touched my cheek, and this time I couldn't pull away. "A better thing." I felt my mind beginning to blur, my consciousness slipping away. I tried to fight it, grabbing at my pendant, but my hands were heavy and slow. Gabriel's whisper echoed as if from a distant tunnel. "You're tired, Elena. Very tired. You need to sleep. And when you wake up, everything will be clearer. Everything will be better." I felt myself nodding, my eyes heavy. A part of me was screaming, but the scream seemed to come from somewhere far away. Despite all my efforts, I fell into darkness. When I woke up, I was lying on something cold and hard. Stone, the altar. I could feel its smooth surface against my back, cold seeping through my thin blouse. Candles surrounded me, their flames unnaturally still in the stagnant underground air. I tried to move, but found my wrists and ankles bound with what felt like silk cords, soft but unbreakable. Gabriel stood at the head of the altar, his silhouette backlit by dozens of candles. He had changed into a long, dark robe that reminded me of ecclesiastical garments, but with symbols embroidered in silver thread along the edges. His face was partially hidden in shadow, but his eyes caught the candlelight, reflecting it like a predatory animal's. "You're awake," he said, his voice different now, deeper, resonant, with an accent I hadn't noticed before. "Good. The transfer requires consciousness." My head throbbed with a dull pain that made it difficult to focus. The air in the chamber felt thick, almost viscous, as if the oxygen itself had been replaced with something heavier. Each breath required effort. What transfer? I managed to ask, my mouth dry, tongue sticking to my palate. Gabriel smiled, a genuine expression that was somehow more terrifying than his calculated charm had been. I've existed for centuries, Elena. This body, he gestured to himself, is merely my current vessel. But all vessels wear out eventually. They begin to resist. As he spoke, I noticed something I hadn't before. Beneath his composed exterior, there was a tremor in his hands. Occasionally his head would twitch slightly to one side, a motion so quick it was almost imperceptible. The body he inhabited was fighting back. "Tonight is special," he continued, opening the ancient book that lay on a pedestal beside the altar. "A convergence that happens once every 33 years. The night when the barrier between vessels is thinnest." He began lighting more candles, black ones placed at specific points around the altar. Each flame ignited with an audible hiss, burning with an intensity that seemed impossible from ordinary wax. "You think I'm insane?" Gabriel observed, not looking up from his preparations. "That's normal. The rational mind rejects what it cannot comprehend. But you've seen what I can do. You've experienced it firsthand." I had. I couldn't deny that. Whatever Gabriel was, whatever power he possessed, it went beyond any rational explanation. "Why me?" I asked again, my voice stronger now, fueled by a growing anger. "There are millions of people in this city. Why choose me?" Gabriel placed a small silver bowl beside me. Inside was a lock of my hair, the hair he'd cut while I slept, and what looked like dried herbs in a dark, viscous liquid. "The source chooses not me," he explained. "When you drank from the fountain at Alameda Park, the water recognized something in you, a receptiveness, a capacity." He leaned closer, studying my face. "Your grandmother wore the same pendant, didn't she?" I froze. How could he know that I can see fragments of memory when I touch objects of significance? He continued, answering my unspoken question. "Your pendant has been passed down for generations. Your family line has potential." A chill ran through me. What did he mean by potential? Had my family somehow encountered beings like Gabriel before he began mixing the contents of the bowl, adding drops from various small bottles? The mixture emitted a faint blue vapor that smelled of ozone and something metallic like blood. "Your grandmother knew," Gabriel said casually. "She felt the old powers. That's why she gave you this protection." He touched my pendant with one finger, then quickly withdrew it as if it had burned him. A crude defense, but surprisingly effective. I thought about my grandmother, her stories about our ancestors, the way she insisted I never remove the pendant. Had she known about people like Gabriel? Had she been protecting me all along? "What happens after the transfer?" I asked, trying to keep him talking while I worked at the bindings around my wrists. They were tight, but I could feel a slight give in the knots. Gabriel's smile widened. "I continue. Your body becomes mine. Your memories remain, but altered, subservient to my consciousness. The Elena who exists now will become a dream, a shadow. And my consciousness, me." He hesitated the first time I'd seen uncertainty in him. "It varies. Some linger as echoes. Some merge with my own. Some simply dissipate." The clinical way he described my obliteration sent a surge of fury through me. This wasn't just murder, it was erasure, the complete annihilation of who I was. "You've done this many times," I said, not a question but a statement. "Since the fall of Tenochtitlan," he confirmed. "Before that I was something else. The Spanish brought their own magic, their own gods. I adapted." As he spoke, he drew symbols on my forehead and palms with the mixture from the bowl. The liquid felt cold at first, then burned like acid. I bit my lip to keep from crying out. The previous hosts I managed through the pain, the shelf of mementos. They were all like me. Each one was unique. Gabriel said, something like fondness in his voice. Manuel was a painter with extraordinary vision. Isabel could hear music in the wind. Jorge had dreams that came true. He looked at me with those penetrating eyes. And you, Elena, you see patterns where others see chaos. Your analytical mind will serve me well. They didn't deserve what you did to them, I said, anger overriding fear. Deserve? Gabriel seemed genuinely puzzled by the concept. The fox doesn't ask if the rabbit deserves to be eaten. The storm doesn't question if the tree deserves to be struck by lightning. I am a force of nature, Elena. I simply am. He began chanting in a language I didn't recognize, not Spanish, not Nahuatl, something older. The candles flickered in unison with each syllable. The air grew heavier, charged with electricity. I could feel the hairs on my arms standing on end. The pendant at my throat grew warm, then hot, almost burning my skin. Gabriel noticed my discomfort and frowned. That trinket is becoming a nuisance, he muttered, reaching to remove it. As his fingers touched the silver chain, a visible shock passed between us. He jerked his hand back with a hiss of pain and glared at the pendant. Your grandmother was more resourceful than I anticipated, he said, shaking his injured hand. No matter, there are other ways. He retrieved a small obsidian knife from beside the book. Its edge glinted in the candlelight, impossibly sharp. My heart raced as he approached, but instead of attacking me, he used the knife to slice open his own palm. Blood welled up dark against his skin. Blood calls to blood, he intoned, holding his bleeding hand over my forehead. Vessel calls to vessel. The old makes way for the new. A drop of his blood fell onto my skin, and the world tilted. I was suddenly seeing through multiple perspectives simultaneously, my own eyes, but also looking down at myself from above and glimpses of other places, other times, a colonial-era Mexico City with canals instead of roads, a small village in the mountains, a modernist apartment overlooking the Zocalo. These are my vessels, Gabriel explained, his voice echoing strangely. My previous lives. Soon yours will join them. Through the disorienting visions, I noticed something critical. The silk cord binding my right wrist had loosened further. If I could just keep him distracted a little longer. How many? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. How many lives have you stolen? Stolen? Again that look of genuine confusion. I have honored them by continuing their lineage, by preserving their essence within me. His expression hardened. But you wouldn't understand. Not yet. He placed both hands on either side of my head, his blood smearing my temples. The visions intensified. I could see flashes of his previous hosts, men and women of different ages and backgrounds, all with the same haunted look in their eyes. The look of someone whose body no longer belonged to them. I am ancient, Gabriel whispered, but the voice didn't seem entirely his own. It had harmonics layers, as if multiple people were speaking in unison. I walked these lands when the first pyramids were built. I witnessed the arrival of those who called themselves conquerors. I have survived plagues, wars, revolutions. His eyes had changed. They were still physically the same, but something else looked out from behind them now, something old, patient, and utterly inhuman. The transfer begins, he said, the multiple voices becoming more pronounced. I felt a pressure in my mind like someone trying to force open a door. My thoughts became sluggish, as if moving through mud. I could feel Gabriel's consciousness pressing against mine, seeking entry points, weaknesses. The pendant burned hotter against my skin, a fierce heat that was somehow comforting. It seemed to repel the invasion, creating a barrier that Gabriel's consciousness couldn't fully penetrate. Stubborn, he muttered, the multiple voices discordant now. Like your grandmother. She fought too, you know, years ago before I found this body. A jolt of shock ran through me. You tried to take her. Gabriel's smile was terrible to behold. She escaped, fled to the countryside, married, had children, but I never forgot her potential. His eyes bored into mine. And now I have her granddaughter instead. The realization crashed over me. My grandmother's insistence on the pendant, her warnings about strangers, her mysterious past, it all made sense now. She hadn't been superstitious. She'd been a survivor. She'd escaped Gabriel and spent the rest of her life preparing to protect her descendants from him. With renewed determination, I worked at the binding on my right wrist. The silk cord gave way just enough for me to slip my hand free. I kept it in place, not wanting Gabriel to notice my partial liberation. He was fully immersed in the ritual now, chanting faster, the voices within him rising and falling in eerie harmony. The symbols he'd drawn on my skin began to glow with a phosphorescent light. The pressure in my head intensified, becoming painful. I felt something tear in my mind, the mental equivalent of ripping fabric. Gabriel's consciousness began seeping in through the tear, alien thoughts and memories invading my own. I saw pyramids, under construction, blood flowing down stone steps, the arrival of Spanish ships on the horizon, plague victims lining city streets, revolutions fought in the name of freedom. But with each memory came a growing horror, the realization that Gabriel wasn't preserving his hosts as he claimed. He was consuming them, absorbing what was useful and discarding the rest. The people whose bodies he had taken weren't continuing within him. They were fuel burned up to sustain his unnatural existence. "No!" I screamed, both vocally and mentally, pushing back against the invasion. To my surprise, Gabriel faltered. The pressure eased momentarily. His eyes widened in shock. "How are you?" he began, but I didn't let him finish. With my free hand, I grabbed my pendant and tore it from my neck. Before he could react, I pressed it against his forehead, directly onto the symbol he had drawn there. The effect was immediate and catastrophic. Gabriel's body convulsed as if electrocuted. He stumbled backwards, screaming in those multiple voices, some deep, some high-pitched, some barely human. The candles around us flared to impossible heights, then extinguished all at once. In the sudden darkness, I worked frantically to free my other hand and my ankles. I could hear Gabriel thrashing nearby, still howling in those terrible voices. A single candle reignited spontaneously, casting just enough light for me to see. Gabriel was on his knees, clawing at his own face, which seemed to be shifting features, rearranging themselves as if different people were fighting for control of his body. "What have you done?" he demanded, but the voice wasn't his. It was younger, frightened. "Manuel," I guessed, remembering the painter he had mentioned. The face shifted again, settling briefly into different features, still recognizably Gabriel, but somehow altered as if viewed through a distorting lens. "Help us!" this new voice pleaded. "He's weakened! The connection—" Before the voice could finish, Gabriel's original features reasserted themselves. He roared with rage, lunging toward me just as I freed my last ankle. I rolled off the altar, barely escaping his grasp, and scrambled toward the staircase. "You cannot escape!" Gabriel shouted behind me, his voice normalizing but thick with fury. "This house obeys me. The doors won't open for you." I didn't stop to argue. I raced up the stairs, the pendant clutched tightly in my fist. Behind me, I heard Gabriel recovering his footsteps, starting up the stairs in pursuit. The door at the top wasn't locked, contrary to his threat. I burst through it into the living room, which now seemed alien and threatening in the dim light. I needed to get out, but he was right about one thing. When I tried the front door, it remained firmly shut, despite being unlocked. Think Elena. I looked around desperately for another exit. The windows too small and likely secured. The back door probably also sealed by whatever power kept the front door shut. I could hear Gabriel climbing the stairs, his movements unsteady but determined. The pendant in my hand pulsed with warmth as if trying to communicate. I looked down at it, a simple silver disc engraved with a spiral pattern that now seemed to be subtly moving, rotating inward toward the center. On impulse, I pressed it against the front door lock. There was a sound like crystal shattering, though nothing visibly broke, and the door swung open. Cool night air rushed in, sweet as salvation. I ran into the front yard just as Gabriel reached the living room. Through the open door, I could see his face contorted with rage and something else, fear. For the first time, he was afraid of what I might do, of the power I inadvertently wielded through my grandmother's pendant. "Elena!" he called after me, his voice shifting between his own and others. "You don't understand what you're refusing the gift I'm offering." I didn't wait to hear more. I ran down the street, not toward my car. The keys were still inside the house, but away into the night-shrouded neighborhood. I had no plan beyond putting distance between us. My phone was in my purse, also left behind. I was alone without resources, but free. After running for what felt like miles, I finally slowed, my lungs burning. The neighborhood had changed, becoming more commercial, with late-night taquerias and bars still open despite the hour. I checked my watch, 3:17 a.m. The ritual had taken longer than I'd thought. I still held the pendant, now cooler but still faintly pulsing with energy. Looking at it more carefully, I noticed tiny inscriptions around the edge of the disc, too small to read without magnification. Whatever power it contained had saved me, but I didn't understand how or why. A taxi approached and I frantically waved it down. The driver looked skeptical when I admitted I had no money, but agreed to take me to my apartment when I promised to pay double the fare upon arrival. As we drove through the sleeping city, I kept checking the rearview mirror, half expecting to see Gabriel's car pursuing us, but the streets behind remained empty. "Bad night?" the driver asked, eyeing my disheveled appearance in the mirror. "The worst," I replied, my voice hoarse from screaming. "Boyfriend trouble," he guessed. I almost laughed at the inadequacy of the description. Something like that. When we reached my building, I asked the driver to wait while I ran upstairs for money. To my surprise, he agreed, though he kept the meter running. My apartment door was locked, but the pendant worked just as it had on Gabriel's door, a crystalline sound, and then it opened. Inside, everything looked normal, undisturbed. I grabbed cash for the taxi, quickly changed clothes, and stuffed a backpack with essentials. I couldn't stay here. Gabriel knew where I lived, had been inside many times without my knowledge. It wasn't safe. After paying the taxi driver, I went to a 24-hour cafe several blocks away. I needed to think, to plan. The adrenaline was wearing off, leaving me shaky and nauseated. I ordered coffee I didn't want and sat in a corner booth examining the pendant more closely. The spiral pattern had stopped moving, becoming static once more. The tiny inscriptions remained illegible. What was this object that had saved me? How had my grandmother known to give it to me? As dawn approached, I made decisions. I would go to the countryside, to the same village where my grandmother had fled years ago. I would learn more about our family, about this power that Gabriel coveted. I would find out why the pendant protected me and how I could use it to ensure he never threatened me or anyone else again. But first, I needed to understand more about the source of memory that Gabriel had mentioned. If people who drank from it were vulnerable to his power, others needed to be warned. I pulled out my phone and searched for information about the fountain in Alameda Park. The official history was mundane. The fountain was part of a renovation in the 1990s. But digging deeper into folklore sites and historical archives, I found references to an ancient spring that had been sacred to pre-Columbian peoples, believed to be a place where memory and reality intersected. When the Spanish built over the indigenous city, the spring had been covered, redirected, but never completely eradicated. I found an old map that showed the original course of the spring. It had indeed run beneath what was now Alameda Park, but it also extended much further, including beneath the very building where I worked. The water I drank daily in my office might come from the same source. The cafe was filling with early morning customers when I noticed something disturbing. A man sitting at the counter kept glancing at me in the mirror behind the bar. There was something familiar about his movements, the deliberate way he stirred his coffee, the angle at which he held his head. When he turned slightly and I caught a glimpse of his eyes, my blood froze. They weren't Gabriel's eyes, but they held the same penetrating quality, the same ancient awareness. He wasn't alone. Gabriel wasn't unique. I gathered my things quickly and left, feeling his gaze follow me. On the street, I hailed another taxi and directed it to the bus station. I needed to leave the city immediately. As the taxi pulled away, I looked back at the cafe. The man stood outside now, watching me go. He made no move to follow, but he didn't need to. The message was clear. They knew me now. They would find me again. The pendant felt heavy around my neck, a responsibility I hadn't asked for but couldn't refuse. My grandmother had fought this battle before me. Now it was my turn. The taxi driver glanced at me in the rearview mirror. "Everything okay, señorita?" I clutched the pendant tightly. "No," I answered honestly, "but it will be." As we drove through the awakening city, I felt a strange sensation, like someone trying on my thoughts the way you might try on a jacket, testing the fit. Gabriel, or part of him, was still with me, a fragment that had transferred despite my escape. I could feel him watching from inside my mind, waiting for an opportunity to grow stronger. I closed my eyes and concentrated on pushing him back, imagining walls around my consciousness, reinforced by my grandmother's protection. The presence receded, but didn't vanish entirely. It would be a constant battle now, I realized, not just externally, but within myself. The morning sun broke over the eastern mountains, painting Mexico City in gold. A new day, a different Elena. Whatever happened next, I knew one thing for certain: I would never be the same person again. Part of me had been irreversibly changed by my encounter with Gabriel. And somewhere in the city, in that house with its underground chamber, Gabriel was recovering, planning, perhaps seeking a new host. Our battle wasn't over. It had barely begun. The bus station appeared ahead, crowded with travelers. I paid the driver and stepped out, my backpack over one shoulder, my grandmother's pendant secure around my neck. I didn't know what awaited me in her village, what secrets I might uncover about my family and our connection to beings like Gabriel. But I knew I couldn't face it alone. I needed allies, knowledge, preparation. And above all, I needed to understand the power that had saved me, not just the pendant, but whatever quality in me had enabled me to resist when so many others had succumbed. As I purchased my ticket, I felt it again, that subtle intrusion, like fingers probing at the edges of my mind. Gabriel testing his connection to me. "Get out," I whispered fiercely, drawing curious glances from nearby passengers. "You don't belong here." The presence retreated once more, but with a sensation that felt disturbingly like amusement. He would be back. And next time he wouldn't be caught off guard by my grandmother's pendant. The departure board showed my bus would leave in 20 minutes. I found a seat in the waiting area and took out my phone. There was research to be done, preparations to make. If I was going to survive this, if I was going to protect others from Gabriel and his kind, I needed to understand what I was fighting. I searched for more information about ancient Mexican beliefs regarding possession memory and consciousness. Most results were academic, focused on religious practices or folklore, but occasionally I found references that sent chills through me. Accounts of individuals who could wear others like clothing, who lived for generations by moving from one body to the next. The stories came from different eras, different regions, but the pattern was consistent. And always there was mention of water-sacred springs, holy wells, places where the boundary between worlds was thin. My bus number was called. As I stood to board, I caught a glimpse of myself in a reflective surface nearby. For just an instant, my eyes didn't look like my own. They were older, calculating, patient. I blinked, and my normal reflection returned. But the message was clear. Gabriel hadn't given up. A part of him had successfully transferred during the ritual, a seed planted in my psyche that would try to grow to overtake me from within. The pendant warmed against my skin, responding to my fear. I took a deep breath and boarded the bus, finding my seat by the window. As the bus pulled away from the station, I watched Mexico City recede, its sprawling vastness glittering in the morning light. I touched the window glass, feeling its coolness against my fingertips. "I'll be back," I promised softly. "And when I return, I won't be running." The presence in my mind stirred, then subsided. For now I had the upper hand. But the war for my consciousness had just begun. And somewhere in the city behind me, Gabriel was already seeking his next victim. Someone else who had unwittingly drunk from the source of memory. I closed my eyes, feeling the rhythm of the bus as it carried me away from danger and toward uncertainty. My grandmother had faced this threat and survived. She had prepared for the possibility that it might one day come for me. Now I needed to prepare for the next generation, for those who might drink from the source without knowing the thirst it would create in beings like Gabriel. Because no matter how far I ran, I carried the truth with me. Now there were predators walking among us, wearing human faces, hungering for our very essence. And the only defense was knowledge passed down from one survivor to the next. The bus accelerated, carrying me into the mountains and away from the city where I had nearly lost myself completely. But part of me remained behind in Gabriel's possession, in his memories, in the connection that had formed between us during the ritual. Just as part of him had come with me, embedded in my mind like a splinter I couldn't quite remove. We were linked now, hunter and prey, each carrying a fragment of the other. And until one of us was truly gone, the hunt would never end. The mountains rose around the highway, ancient and indifferent to human concerns. I pressed my grandmother's pendant to my lips, a silent thank you for her foresight, for the protection she had provided from beyond the grave. "I'll finish what you started," I whispered to her memory. "I promise." The presence in my mind recoiled from these words, from my determination. For now it was enough. For now I was still Elena, and I intended to remain myself no matter what it took. As the city disappeared completely behind a mountain curve, I faced forward toward whatever awaited me. The future was uncertain, but one thing was clear. The night I met Gabriel had changed everything. And nothing, not my mind, not my understanding of reality, not my sense of self, would ever be the same again. When I woke the next morning, sunlight streamed through unfamiliar curtains. For a blissful moment, I didn't remember where I was or what had happened. Then reality crashed back with brutal clarity. I was in a motel room on the outskirts of Cuernavaca, about 2 hours from Mexico City. I had spent the last of my cash on this room after the bus journey, collapsing into unconsciousness as soon as I locked the door. I sat up, feeling oddly disconnected from my body. Something felt wrong, different, as if I'd put on clothes that didn't quite fit. The sensation of someone else occupying the corners of my mind remained, though fainter now, like a radio playing in a distant room. In the bathroom mirror, I examined myself carefully. My face looked the same brown eyes, the same features, but something in my expression seemed altered, as if I were viewing myself through a slightly distorted lens. I touched my grandmother's pendant, still hanging around my neck. It felt cooler now, dormant. Had it used up its power, protecting me, or was it simply waiting, gathering strength for the next confrontation? As I splashed water on my face, I noticed something on my inner wrist that made my blood run cold. A small mark like a tattoo, a simple eye inside a triangle that I was certain hadn't been there before last night. I scrubbed at it frantically, but it remained, the ink seemingly embedded beneath my skin. Gabriel had marked me somehow despite my escape. A tracking symbol, a claim of ownership. Whatever its purpose, the sight of it filled me with dread. I checked my phone, partly hoping and partly fearing it would be dead, severing my final connection to my old life. But it powered on, showing several missed calls from work. It was Monday morning. I was expected at the office. That normal, ordinary fact seemed absurd after what I'd experienced. With trembling fingers, I scrolled through my contacts, my call history, my messages, searching for any trace of Gabriel. There was nothing. No messages, no calls, no photos, no evidence he had ever existed in my digital life. Yet the mark on my wrist proved he wasn't just a nightmare. He was real, and what had happened between us had been real. I needed to keep moving. I showered quickly, changing into the clean clothes I'd stuffed into my backpack. My plan to reach my grandmother's village remained, but first I needed money. I'd have to stop at a bank, withdraw enough cash to sustain me for weeks, possibly months. As I checked out of the motel, the receptionist gave me a curious look. "Did you sleep well, señorita?" she asked. "You seemed very agitated when you checked in." "Fine, thank you," I replied automatically. "And your friend, did he find you?" My hand froze on the pen I'd been using to sign the receipt. My friend. Yes, the gentleman who came looking for you last night. Very distinguished, well-dressed. He said he was worried about you. My heart thundered in my chest. When was this? Maybe an hour after you checked in. I told him we don't give out guest information, of course. She lowered her voice conspiratorially. Though he was very persuasive, for a moment I almost forgot our policy. Gabriel had tracked me here, had followed me to Cuernavaca. The distance I'd put between us meant nothing. Did he leave a message? I managed to ask, my voice surprisingly steady. No, he just smiled and said he'd catch up with you eventually, no rush. She studied my face. Is everything okay, señorita? You look pale. Everything's fine, I lied. Thank you. I left quickly, constantly checking over my shoulder as I walked to the nearest bank. I withdrew the maximum amount allowed, knowing I was emptying my account, but not caring. Money wouldn't matter if Gabriel succeeded in taking me over. Throughout the day, as I traveled deeper into the countryside, I felt watched. On the second bus heading toward the mountains where my grandmother's village nestled, I could have sworn I saw Gabriel sitting 3 rows behind me. But when I turned for a better look, the seat held an elderly woman who gave me a concerned smile. My nerves were fraying. Every reflection, every window, every pair of eyes seemed to hide Gabriel's presence. Was he really following me, or was this paranoia? Or worse, was this his influence growing inside my mind, making me doubt my own perceptions? I arrived in the small mountain town of San Miguel Zinacantepec as evening approached. My grandmother had rarely spoken of her hometown, but I remembered the name from documents I'd found after her death. The bus dropped me at a small plaza dominated by a colonial-era church. The town was preparing for some kind of festival. Colorful paper decorations hung across the streets, and vendors were setting up stalls in the plaza. The festive atmosphere felt jarringly at odds with my state of mind. I found a small guest house on a side street and checked in, giving a false name without really knowing why. After settling into my room, I ventured out hoping to find someone who might have known my grandmother's family. At a small cantina near the church, I approached the elderly bartender and showed him a photo of my grandmother I kept in my wallet. It had been taken when she was young, shortly after she'd left this town. Elena Vasquez, I said, using my grandmother's maiden name. Her family lived here. I'm her granddaughter. The old man's expression changed instantly, a mixture of recognition and wariness crossing his features. Vasquez, he repeated softly. The family with the silver eyes. Silver eyes. My grandmother's eyes had been brown like mine. He leaned closer, his voice dropping. Not always. Only when they called on the old powers. Your grandmother was the last one who could do it before she left. He studied my face. Why have you come back after all these years? I need to understand something that happened to her. Something that's happening to me now. Understanding dawned in his eyes. The hollow man found you. The phrase sent a chill through me. The hollow man. That's what they called him here. The one who wears others like clothes, discards them when they wear out. He glanced around, though the cantina was nearly empty. Your grandmother was the only one who ever escaped him, the only one he couldn't take. How? I asked, desperate for answers. How did she stop him? The old man touched the space over his heart where my pendant would rest. The spiral, the ancient protection. He shook his head. I've already said too much. You should speak with Doña Lucia. She was your grandmother's friend, knows the old ways better than anyone still living. He gave me directions to a house on the outskirts of town, warning me that Doña Lucia rarely received visitors after dark. But this couldn't wait until morning. I thanked him and hurried out, feeling Gabriel's presence growing stronger in my mind as night fell. You're wasting your time, a voice that wasn't quite my own whispered in my thoughts. I'm already part of you. You can't remove me. I clutched the pendant, willing it to silence the voice, and it subsided temporarily. But I knew it would return stronger each time. Doña Lucia's house stood apart from others, surrounded by a garden of medicinal herbs and flowers. despite the late-hour lights glowed in the windows. As I approached the gate, the door opened before I could knock. An elderly woman stood in the doorway, small and bent with age, but with eyes as sharp as a hawk's. She wore a simple dress with an embroidered shawl, and around her neck hung a pendant identical to mine. "I've been waiting for you," she said in Spanish. "I knew Elena's granddaughter would come someday." She looked past me into the darkness. "And I know he followed you here." "How?" "Come inside," she interrupted, opening the door wider, "quickly before he finds a vessel close enough to reach you." I stepped into the warm, fragrant interior. Bundles of dried herbs hung from the ceiling, and candles burned on every surface, their light reflecting off dozens of small mirrors strategically placed around the room. "The mirrors confuse him," Doña Lucia explained, seeing my curious glance. "Makes it harder for him to focus his will." She gestured for me to sit at a small table in the center of the room. As I did, she examined my face closely, then took my hands in hers, turning them over to reveal the mark on my wrist. "He's claimed you," she said gravely, "but hasn't taken you completely. Your grandmother's protection worked." "What is he?" I asked the question that had haunted me since that night in the restaurant. "What does he want?" "He is what remains of a priest from before the conquest. One who found a way to cheat death by taking the bodies of others. The Spanish tried to destroy his kind, but instead taught him new methods, new magics." She touched my pendant. "This is older than him from the time before time. It's why he couldn't complete the transfer." "But a part of him is inside me," I said. "I can feel him trying to take control." She nodded grimly. "The partial transfer is dangerous, neither fully yourself nor fully him. It creates a connection. He can see through your eyes, sometimes feel what you feel." Horror flooded through me. "He's watching us now." "Not at this moment. The mirrors, the candles, they disrupt his sight." She squeezed my hands. "But he will try again, Elena. And next time he'll be prepared for the pendant's power. How do I stop him? How do I get his essence out of me?" Doña Lucia's expression darkened. "There is a way, but it comes with great sacrifice." She hesitated. "Your grandmother chose a different path. She chose to live with his fragment inside her, to keep it contained, controlled, to ensure he could never use it as a bridge to someone else." The implication settled over me like a shroud. "You're saying my grandmother lived her entire life with him inside her, fighting him, every day. She was strong, stronger than anyone I've ever known." Doña Lucia's eyes bored into mine. "The question is, are you as strong?" Before I could answer, one of the candles flickered violently, then extinguished. Then another, and another. Doña Lucia stood quickly. "He's found a vessel nearby, someone weak-willed enough to possess temporarily." She grabbed a small pouch from a shelf. "Take this. Salt herbs blessed by the old ways and the new. It will buy you time." "Time for what?" I asked, panic rising. "To decide, to fight or to flee, to contain or to transfer." She pressed the pouch into my hands. "But know this, whatever remains of your grandmother's strength lives in you now. You are not defenseless." A sudden wind rattled the windows, though the night had been still minutes before. Doña Lucia pushed me toward a back door. "Go now. I will delay him. Find the church Sikh sanctuary. In the morning return and I will show you what your grandmother learned." I stumbled out into the darkness, clutching the pouch and my pendant. Behind me I heard Doña Lucia begin to chant in a language that seemed to resonate with something deep in my blood. The wind grew stronger as I ran through unfamiliar streets trying to find my way back to the plaza and the church. Lightning split the sky, though there had been no storm in the forecast. The festival decorations whipped violently and the gale paper lanterns shattering against buildings. Gabriel was coming. Not physically, perhaps, but his power was reaching for me, trying to reclaim the fragment lodged in my mind, trying to complete what he had started. As I reached the plaza, I saw a figure standing before the church doors. A local man, middle-aged, dressed in simple clothes, but standing unnaturally still. As I approached, he turned and I saw Gabriel's eyes looking out from the stranger's face. "Elena," the man said, but it was Gabriel's voice. "You've led me on quite a chase." "Stay away from me," I warned, backing toward the church doors. "You can't escape what's already inside you," he said, tapping his temple. "I'm there growing stronger each day." "This vessel is temporary, but you're the one I've chosen." "You chose wrong," I said, my hand closing around the church's door handle. Gabriel smiled, using the stranger's face. "Did I look at yourself, Elena? Really look?" Against my better judgment, I glanced at my reflection in the church's window. For an instant, just an instant, my eyes weren't my own. They were ancient, patient, calculating. "You see," Gabriel said softly, "it's already happening. The transfer continues even without the ritual. Slower, yes, but inevitable." I yanked open the church door. "Nothing is inevitable." "We'll see," he replied. "I have existed for centuries. I can wait a little longer for you." As I stepped inside the church, the stranger's body crumpled to the ground, Gabriel's presence departing as suddenly as it had come. The local man would wake with a gap in his memory, perhaps a headache, but otherwise unharmed. I sank onto a pew, trembling with exhaustion and fear. The church was empty at this hour, silent except for the flicker of votive candles near the altar. I clutched my pendant, feeling its reassuring warmth against my palm. Gabriel was right about one thing. A part of him lived inside me now. I could feel it, a shadow in my mind, waiting for moments of weakness. But Doña Lucia was right, too. I carried my grandmother's strength, her legacy of resistance. Tomorrow I would return to her, learn what my grandmother had learned, prepare for a battle that might last the rest of my life. The thought was terrifying, exhausting, but also strangely liberating. I knew the truth now. I knew what I faced. As dawn approached, I knelt before the altar, not praying exactly, but gathering my resolve. When I finally looked up at the golden cross gleaming in the first light of day, I made a silent vow not just to survive, but to end Gabriel's centuries of predation, to ensure he could claim no more victims. In the chapel's silence, I felt the fragment of Gabriel within me recoil from my determination. Good. Let him fear me for a change. I touched the mark on my wrist, no longer seeing it as his claim upon me, but as a reminder of what I was fighting for: my life, my identity, my future. This was just the beginning of our war, a war my grandmother had fought before me, and I intended to be the one to end it. As I left the church to face the new day, I felt someone watching me from across the plaza. Not Gabriel this time, but a young woman about my age sitting alone at a cafe. She sipped from a water bottle, her eyes meeting mine with a flash of recognition neither of us should have felt. She had drunk from the source, too. I could sense it somehow, could see her potential shimmering around her like heat waves. Another possible vessel for Gabriel. Another target. Without hesitation, I changed direction and walked toward her. I would warn her, protect her if I could. Because if I had learned anything from this nightmare, it was that knowledge was the only real defense against predators like Gabriel. "Excuse me," I said as I reached her table. "This might sound strange, but have you been to Alameda Park in Mexico City recently?" Her eyes widened slightly. "Yes, last week. How did you know?" I touched my pendant, feeling its gentle pulse against my fingers. "We need to talk. There's something you should know about the water there." As I sat down across from her, I felt Gabriel's presence stir within me, alert and wary. He knew what I was doing, knew I was interfering with his plans. Good. Let him know that his hunt wouldn't be as easy as it had been for centuries, because now for the first time his prey was hunting back.